Good afternoon, Laurie. It is great to see you. And Jasmine, I feel like I have the pleasure of introducing two important people. Jasmine Gota, who is involved in overseeing all of the World as It Could Be website, social media work that we do, is herself getting her doctorate in human rights education at the University of San Francisco, adding not only to our creative talents, but to just understanding all that we're doing. And we have the pleasure of meeting Laurie Van Balen, who is the founder and director of the Columbus Crossing Borders Project that I got to be familiar with through Pedro Mena, who is an art teacher who first worked with me at the Rex Foundation many years ago in San Francisco, but moved to Columbus, Ohio, met Laurie and connected us. And we've had the great pleasure and privilege of collaborating now for a few years. And I want us to be able to hear a lot about the Columbus Crossing Borders Project, and particularly how Laurie has been incorporating discussion about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for a while now, to get her perspective on why she started doing that and what it means to you. So here we go. So Laurie, I'm wondering if you could explain a little bit about the Columbus Crossing Border Project and how you began that and what you're doing.
Sure. So it began probably at the end of 2015. There was a lot of talk at that time about building walls and travel bans, and there were many shocking new policies that were being talked about, and ideas that were being introduced by the presidential platform of Donald Trump. And this eventually, of course, was implemented with his incoming presidency and his new administration. But there was a great deal of misinformation that began sweeping through the country about refugees and immigration in general. And I was mindful that there were a lot of people who were and still are unfamiliar with the facts about refugees. And frankly, the lack of awareness and the lack of critical thinking on the part of many of these people concerned me then as it concerns me now. Additionally, I personally knew a number of people who were falling for the fear-based propaganda and the myths that were being perpetuated at that time about the refugee population. And I felt that as an artist, I just felt compelled at that point to use my art to create some sort of presentation, an art exhibit. It was born out of frustration. It was born out of a great passion for what I knew to be the truth. And I wanted it to reach beyond the label of being about refugees, and instead introduce the audience to people and stories, real human beings. So I wanted to shine a spotlight on those stories and how that fits into our common humanity. So I invited fellow artists, including a film crew, to use our collective art to inspire critical thinking and understanding. And I felt like if I could provide an up-close, intimate look into their personal human struggle, then maybe we could give the opportunity to the audience to observe and connect. So that's what led to the birth of the Columbus Crossing Borders Project. And just to be brief about what actually evolved from that in terms of the presentation itself, it's an art exhibit and a documentary film. And they were created to inspire critical thinking, compassion, and support for the millions and millions, so many millions of people who've been forced to flee their homes for a number of reasons: war, climate, violence, persecution. And the art exhibit features the collective contribution of 34 artists who were asked to respond and tell stories about the plight of refugees in whatever way they wanted to. And then their paintings had to cross borders and connect. They had to literally cross into each other's artwork as you move from left to right. And that metaphor served as not only border crossings, but how we're all very territorial, artists particularly, about our work and about our homes. And so what evolved from this was this beautiful outpouring of community as they overlapped and integrated their work. And then the art exhibit was actually documented as it was being created. And so we have a documentary film that followed the creation, but also tells the story of a handful of refugees who come from different places. And it took off. The film is still being shown throughout the United States, and to great response. So those two things together are what was born originally from the Columbus Crossing Borders Project.
Well, and we're looking forward to featuring more of your work as part of this whole discussion so that we can showcase what you now have, especially your online gallery, which is quite impressive.
Thank you.
I'd like if you could to articulate a little bit more about what inspired you to include the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as part of your work.
Yeah. So, that was interesting because I believe that there's a lot of synchronicity in life anyways. And so around the time I met you, Sandy, was around the time that I started noticing this sort of uptick during our events over the past 4 years. And I met you, a few years ago. And whether these events were in person or online, we were being introduced to this vast audience. I mean, this exhibit and documentary film took off. We were traveling from city to city, and the audience we met with consisted of people of all ages and all cultures, all religions, just a variety of demographics. But the discussion that we shared over and over again with these audience members was how they cared. But it was startling how many of these people were telling us they cared about refugees, they cared about human rights, they cared about social justice, but they felt powerless in light of the hardships and the pain that we're all experiencing, not just refugees, but everybody. And these are people who had great concern about the things that we're seeing every day in our lives, such as racism, poverty, homelessness, issues of social justice in general. And yet they felt helpless and they didn't know what to do to make a difference. So around this time, as I got to know you, I became reacquainted. Well, of course, I think many of us have been introduced to the idea, or at least we have a vague understanding of what human rights are, but I became reacquainted with what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights really was. And I had to ask myself at that same time, why do we all feel powerless? Why are these things that we feel powerless about even happening? And the UDHR was addressing those questions, as they have addressed those questions for over 70 years. By the Universal Declaration of Human Rights covers it all. And begin with the basics, the basic needs that everybody has: water, food, medicine, clothing, shelter. And then you go on through the rest of it: the dignity for all people, to protect us all from abuse. These were all the issues we were facing. And I realized how neglected we are in our daily lives when it comes to these this ethical structure that the UDHR provides for us. And the UDHR is designed to empower people. I think, and to give them a freedom of expression and speech and lifestyle so they can practice what they believe, but with dignity and respect for all people. That seemed like the perfect response to what we needed. But somehow with the UDHR, the idea is to make it tangible, to take it past that point where it's becoming, a beautiful concept, to show how it applies to our daily lives. Because unless it applies to our daily lives, it's not going to make any difference anywhere else on a broader scale. So that I became very, very invested in the idea and in the work involved and answering, not using the, of course, the refugee concern as our centerpiece still, but to start addressing this drive that I see going on to reintroduce the Universal Declaration of Human Rights into our schools, into all forms of education, and to establish a universal standard, which it was designed to do. So that's basically what happened. And then I started just zeroing in and focusing more on what our part was in doing that.
When you talk about the UDHR in your work or just in general,
I lost you again. Okay.
mhm,
There it is. There it is.
sorry. When you talk about the UDHR in your work or just in other forums, how do you or how would you explain its continuing relevance today, even though it is really quite old?
Right, right. Well, I think particularly now, during this time that there's a lot of, some people refer to as a lot of lies, being misled, hoodwinked, divided, unempowered. I think we need to be reminded that as human beings, we're all in this together. I really believe that. Like, I feel that very, very, very strongly. I think caring, compassion, putting love into action, these are all natural human instincts. I think we need to be reintroduced to the idea that we are community and that collectively we have great power. And I think in that way, it's very relevant. I think in order to inspire a loving and a positive change and to encourage people to take responsibility and recognize the skills and tools that they already possess to bring peace and solidarity back into our lives, I think the UDHR is very relevant in that. And, you know, as if you really think about this, the only way we're going to survive is if we look out for each other. And this is all within that perspective of human rights. Looking out for each other's lives personally and collectively, and caring about our schools and our neighborhoods and our national and international communities, to know that it's not them, it's not those people out there, it's us. We're the ones that need to do that. So I think in that way, it's relevant across the board.
And in connection with that, you know, part of the world as it could be from our beginnings, one of the things that became very clear was that it was the creative arts that helped inspire our participating youth to really grasp the concepts of the UDHR and to be given the opportunity to express their ideas about it. And that's really what motivated us in our curriculum development, to make sure that we were integrating the arts as a major part of all the learnings of the Universal Declaration and how it applies in our lives. Mm-hmm. You are an artist and you're using the arts, and I'd like to hear from you how you describe the power of the arts to inspire others to actually understand human rights, other issues, and take action.
Well, I've been asked this a number of times. I've done a number of interviews and speaking engagements where this sort of conversation comes up. And whenever I think about it, for some reason, the thing that pops into my head is when I was a teenager, the song that came out by Buffalo Springfield, For What It's Worth.
Oh, it's one of my favorite songs.
It's a powerful song, which a lot of people, they think it has to do with Kent State, but it was actually written before Kent State happened. But, and of course I'm aging myself here, but at the time, the power of that music, the power of what was coming out of in the arts. I've had full conversations with high school students about this that go on for hours. But really, truly, I think art music, and when I say art, I mean all kinds of art. I'm talking about, media across the board, has the power to affect us. You think about songs that changed our lives. Respect by Aretha Franklin, and how that addressed women. Get Together by the Youngbloods, talking about love in a very tangible way. A Change Is Going to Come by Sam Cooke. I mean, there's so many films, TV shows. We turn to art for inspiration because it allows us to travel somewhere else. It jolts us and challenges us into a perspective that we may not have seen before. But it's relatable, paintings, film, music, poetry, dance. It transports us sometimes to a different time and space, but sometimes to a time and space that is endless, that we all encounter. Um, I think I think for me personally, as an artist, that's always been my greatest voice. That's been the voice that I've used. I mean, obviously, when I was going through this pain of looking at the refugee crisis and seeing people, risking at great cost, trying to bring their families here and facing challenges that required courage that I can't even imagine ever having to muster. To take that and to turn it into my art was as much therapeutic for me as it was an effort to reach others. And I think that's always been my natural bent. Now, as an art teacher and as somebody who has invested years into bringing people into my studio and showing them skills, I know from experience what it means to empower people and help them find voices. And so I think the relevance isn't just to try to reach an audience, it's trying to teach the audience how to find their own power and to help and to help them find the confidence. I think people need to be reminded that we all have a skill. We all have something that we can offer, and oftentimes it's through our art. It's a beautiful thing, but it's also extremely magical and powerful thing. I think of films like A Color Purple, Saving Private Ryan, that addresses issues in ways that you and I could talk about racism, we could talk about World War II or the horrors of war, but actually being presented with it through an art form is going to leave a much more lasting impression.
I think that is such important information. I know that when we described, even in our curriculum, we have a whole page about why the arts. And I know Ellen Sebastian Chang, who's been part of our program from the beginning, had said it's the arts that reach us emotionally. You can read, like you could read every word of the Universal Declaration, but when you actually even have to embody an idea, like physically or through some visual expression, what justice looks like, then you get an entirely different idea about it. And I remember one young student after one of our presentations was asked this question, and she was literally sitting on stage and said, well, when I start thinking about this concept and I start moving around, and she was doing that, she said, I just feel the whole thing. And this was from a student. And I think that certainly has always been evidence that it makes a difference. And I think that we need that in our lives.
I've seen people moved to their hearts and minds changed over a piece of art much more than they ever would have been if they had been talked to. People resist being talked to, but when you present something to them that they can explore at their own pace, in their own time, in their own way, particularly if it's a story, if it's somebody's story, I've seen people affected very deeply.
Yeah. And in fact, there had been a program about the history of violence or in the world, and pointing out that one of the factors that helped change things was the introduction of the printing press and the availability of people being able to read not only newspapers, but novels. And that it was reading these novels that allowed people to feel empathy.
Mhm.
And from that, to be able to say, wait, we want to put a stop to what we're seeing as not right. And that actually was part of the beginning of a shift, which we're still going through, but it was certainly a big part of being able to change the world from being totally in a state of violent reactions to one of being able to start using our intellect as well as our emotions to think about things differently.
Mhm.
I feel like in the honor of everybody, just being able to take all of this in, that I want to say thank you for this beginning. I hope that perhaps we could use this as a start to having some more conversation, because what prompted me to think is bringing some people in and asking them to describe their favorite book or favorite song or favorite piece of art, and why, and what that compelled them to now think about or do something about. That might be a very interesting kind of opening for just a different way of looking at the world, and perhaps connecting it even as possible to human rights thinking. And I want to just say that I am excited about our collaborative work together, that we have been able to showcase each other's work, and that we're looking forward to perhaps publishing this for more people to see, and that we can continue to have conversation about what I think is really important for us to keep changing in a positive way in this world that we're living in, for all the
Yeah.
different
Well,
things.
I feel, Sandy, that remarkable things happen when we take this message into places outside of our space. And I think you've done a lot to help our communities, through what the work you've done for much longer than I have. It's really making equality, freedom, justice, and respect. It's reinforcing them in ways again, it's that whole idea of making it tangible. So I thank you for what you're doing, because you're inspiring a lot of people with what you're doing.
Thank you. I look forward to what comes of this, and offer any closing comments. Jasmine, do you have anything you'd like to add as we close in terms of thoughts?
No, I
The
enjoyed
youngest, maybe you have a song that you think of. We were talking about songs that I knew every song that Laurie mentioned. I'm not sure that you might have, because you're young, but
somehow I actually did. And yeah, I very much appreciated this conversation. This was a lot of fun. I have an arts background, but I don't have too many discussions with other artists very often lately, because I've been in academia. So Laurie, this has been great. Like, it helps me kind of also get back to some of my thinking about, I have an actual formal arts background, but I
What
haven't
was your medium? What do you work in, Jasmine?
mostly computer arts, so digital medias, but I also have a background in abstract watercolor.
Mm-hmm.
That's what my grandparents did. But yeah, I'm just trying to look through like some of the notes that I had here. Like, this was an awesome conversation about human rights and art. As I hear a lot of folks throw those terms around in different places, but they're not always really well defined as like, why are we doing this? How do they connect together? I was also reminded, I was teaching a design class, and I'd gone over, I think we were mostly talking about principles and elements. And one day, one of my students finally came in and she said, I was looking at all of the line and the shape and the texture, and I was on the Muni, and all of a sudden it all clicked together, and I could just see how it worked out in the real world. And a lot of what we talk about with the UDHR, those are those kind of aha moments that I'm always hoping that we can find ways of connecting together.
Well,
So
what's fascinating, really, when you consider this, is when you talk about UDHR and how it empowers people and gives them the opportunity to use whatever facilities they have to address what needs to be dealt with. You think about the freedom of expression, and what is the first thing that usually starts to get taken away when those rights are being challenged?
Right.
And it's the arts,
Right.
because they know the power of them.
That's right. Yeah. I think I think there could be a lot more, even though there is an awful lot of discussion going on about the arts and the importance of it. We've tried posting a bunch of things, but really, I don't think it's fully recognized just what role the arts play in our world.
Yeah, you know, and Sandy, I think the focus of your website illustrates that. Our website illustrates that, and our community page, we feature some of the work that's being done. And the more, it's kind of a sign of the times, I think. The more schools I go into, which I you know, up until the pandemic went into quite a few, and now we're doing that virtually. But although it's great, we can actually start going back into the schools now. But one of the things that I'm recognizing as a sign of the times is how many teachers, particularly art teachers, are encouraging their students to express themselves. They bring them to our exhibit. They're writing poetry, they're writing essays, they're creating their own crossing borders art. And I think that is something that is escalating, not diminishing at all.
Thank goodness. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I hope you and I can continue. We talked about figuring out how to have some type of conversation online, like a form of a podcast or something, but
Yes.
topics that might be worth elaborating on.
Mhm.
In this case, we really wanted to hear from you, and you were so eloquent. I think what I appreciated the most is how you spoke of the need for people to feel like they could do something, and that you found that the UDHR provided this kind of impetus for action. And I don't think I've heard it said as well as the way you just said that. And
Well,
I
thank you.
because
I couldn't repeat it. I don't, it
Well,
just came out.
we now have it. We have it on record.